Serial Experiments Lain is an anime that has long stirred curiosity in the minds of those who dare to untangle its mysteries. But what if I told you this series was only part of the larger story? Lost in the archives of the digital age exists a PlayStation game unlike anything else. It's not a retelling of the anime, it's something stranger, something darker, and something far more disorienting. There are no battles to fight, no choices to make, no definitive ending waiting at the finish line. Instead, the experience is fragmented. Therapy sessions, distorted voices, visions, played back as scattered pieces of a girl's mind. It's a game that refuses to explain itself, forcing you to ask, what is Lain trying to tell us this time? Through the screen that separates our worlds. Identity, reality, connection. Are we just observers or participants in her fragmented consciousness? To begin answering that question, we must first step back and ask, how does a game like this come to exist? Serial Experiments Lain for the PlayStation actually predates the debut of the anime cult classic by several months, releasing in Japan late November 1998. This doesn't necessarily solidify the story's events as set before the anime, though there is a theory that suggests this we could consider. It does mean, however, that the game and the anime were developed alongside one another, forming pieces of a larger narrative that can only exist in the unique cultural and tech bubble of the late 1990s. In an era where the internet was still a mysterious frontier, and creators were experimenting with ways to tell stories, and the idea that was Lain was too good not to take advantage of the period. In the uncertainty and anxiety of the emerging internet age, Lain and The Wired became a perfect metaphor for a rapidly advancing society, both in Japan and across the globe. No one truly understood yet what the internet would become. It was a Pandora's box, strange, potentially dangerous, yet impossible to resist inviting into your daily life. Personal computers, PlayStations, and cell phones were connecting people across cities and continents and becoming an inseparable part of life. It widely spread information, simplified communication, and entertained masses with endless possibilities and uses. The world would never be the same. For the first time, citizens across nations were bound together by the invisible wires of the internet. Lain's story was designed to be spread, not through mass media marketing, but through exposure across these wires. She became a figure who appeared across multiple platforms, magazines, games, anime, and websites. Wherever you looked, it seemed she was there, following you, watching you. But there was no mass publication pointing to Lain and her story. It felt secretive, as if to truly understand her you must comb through the web, search through cryptic web forums, or pick up a $5 PlayStation disc with no real information on what exactly you're getting into. The creators wanted it to feel as if the narrative of Lain was happening everywhere at once, mirroring the omnipresent networked nature of The Wired and the internet itself. Hence the name Serial Experiments. Lain was just our vessel for understanding her worlds. The anime gave us a linear narrative, an accessible entry point to Serial Experiments Lain, discovering The Wired, questioning her existence, and unraveling the border between the digital and the real. The PlayStation game, by contrast, was far more psychological, far more personal and unsettling. It presented an alternate version of Lain, another possibility, as if her character could manifest differently depending on how and where you encountered her being. Art books, design documents, and promotional websites become more than paper and code. They have a sense of identity, fragments of Lain's personality scattered across multiple mediums, forcing the audience to piece together her story, and in doing so, reflect on the multiplicity of identity as it is found within us all. The result is that Lain becomes less a traditional character and more a presence, someone who shifts between forms and realities. No two stories the same, each one slightly tweaked and altered. It leaves you to wonder which Lain is the real one. There must be one right answer. There must be a true Lain that we can point to and agree is the absolute version. But that would be ignoring the nature of identity itself, the fragments of various personalities that exist in all of us, each social interaction activating different responses for how we should act and be. Perhaps all these Lains exist at once, all part of the same identity but different in character. This philosophy was embedded in the project from the very beginning. Lain isn't merely a story to watch or a game to play. She's an idea. To grasp her, you must assemble the fragments scattered across screens and paper. We've already come to know her through the anime's lens, but now it's time to confront another fragment, one steeped in shadows, suffused with despair. Her story unfolds as a sound novel scattered across an interactive database of diary entries, therapy sessions, and lost footage, disorganized, jumbled, just like memory itself. The most striking aspect is that you were not merely just a player. You were a presence within the story. You become the one prodding through Lain's mind, observing her from the other side of an uncrossable barrier, a border she may yet find a way to cross. Lain has always reached out to connect with us, no matter the medium. The game is no different. In the end, we don't just play Lain, we experience her. The journey begins without clear directions, only a database of scattered fragments, the therapy sessions, visual memories, and diary entries from both Lain and her therapist Toko. The logs letting us intrude on their most private moments. Lain's diary reveals the voice of a child, uncertain of her own feelings and identity. She doesn't pour her heart onto the page like Toko. She simply records emotions, detached and incomplete, as if she can't make sense of the visions that haunt her and the emotions that rise from within. But before diving into a fragmented mind, it's important to understand how we arrived at this point, how Lain became our lens into this world, because this girl's story is much different than the one we already know. Iwakuro Lain, an 11-year-old girl, is placed in therapy by her mother after she begins claiming to see people, visions that intrude on both her day and nights. She is assigned to a young researcher, Toko, who has just returned to Japan after graduating from an American university. But she herself is not the most stable. Her diary is filled with obsessive entries about Takeshi, a fellow psychologist who takes her on dates, but also manipulates her affections. Her fixation on him is so consuming that it raises questions about her emotional reliability as a therapist. Lain is Toko's first patient since earning her qualifications, though the assignment is forced upon her by her overseer, Takashima. The doctor is insistent she takes on the case, despite her primary role at Tachibana Labs being child psychiatry research, not direct therapy. And so she begins working with Lain, trying to untangle the visions that haunt the girl's day and night. It takes time for Lain to open up and start speaking, but Toko doesn't press. She builds trust slowly, carefully, until the silence starts to crack. Yet this careful approach allows for their sessions to lead somewhere a little unsettling. The relationship drifted away from professional into something blurred. Toko finds herself confining in her patient, as if she were a friend, spilling frustrations about work, about daily exhaustion. The sessions stop being therapy and start becoming a trade, one voice for another, one wound for another. The fact she is so blind to the shifting relationship she has with an 11-year-old is disturbing in itself. What's more striking is how Lain responds. She rarely feels a desire to talk about the visions that she's there for, instead finding ways to turn the conversation around, pressing Toko for explanations about psychology, about how the mind works, about how diagnostics happen. Lain seems more intent on learning the system than being helped by it. Their exchange becomes information about psychology and about Toko, and in return the therapist gets to air out some stress while also hearing pieces of what's bothering her patient. On the surface, Toko's approach resembles progress, a careful, patient strategy for drawing Lain out. But beneath it, the cracks show. What looks clinical is in fact naive, the work of someone without the experience to guard herself against the patient she's meant to guide. Toko binds herself too closely to Lain, leaning on her words, even her silences, with an almost reckless trust, a fatal blind spot in Lain's treatment, born from Toko's own need for therapy. And so the question arises, who is treating whom? Which is benefiting from the sessions the most? Toko has no answer, and neither do we. So why exactly is Lain here? She first comes to therapy with what appears to be a mix of sleep paralysis and fleeting hallucinations when waking, harmless symptoms the kind a child normally grows out of. By all measures, she has improved over the last year, made friends, went shopping with classmates like Kyoko, good grades. It was a life that seemed entirely ordinary. Lain insists something remains wrong, something she cannot articulate, nor does she fully want to. The visions scare her, and Toko, preoccupied with the slow collapse of her own life, fails to catch this hesitation. The truth only begins to bleed through when Lain enters junior high, where her fragile reality warps beyond the frame. Dreamlike hopes crush beneath a weight she can't name. Lain's father gives her a computer, the very spark that ignites her descent into the world of the wired. Or maybe better phrased as a return. Each step deeper into its circuitry unravels the life she had painted to Toko. Kyoko slips away, her household fractures, but her mind focuses on the object of obsession and the world it offers as an emotional escape. Her diary becomes a mirror of that descent, half-desperate self-doubt, half-fevered schematics on bending technology beyond its limits. The more she fuses her identity with the wired, the less she belongs to the world around her, ostracized by others, afraid of her descent into the darkest corners of the internet. Toko too begins to echo this very same social collapse, her own fragile foundations splintering in parallel. Her longtime lover Takeshi begins to drift without explanation. Each day he remains absent, Toko etches in the diary new despair, her self-worth unraveling in the very lines of ink. A single hello from him can lift her to impossible heights, only for the next day's silence to plunge her back into doubt and desolation. Her emotions swing violently between euphoria and ruin, her identity tethered to the faintest sign of his attention. Each entry grates with the desperation of someone clinging past reason. Not a lover's voice, but an obsessed echo unwilling to face adrift. Some ties simply snap. Whether one accepts the break or scrambles to knot the frayed ends becomes the question. But some strings connect people without intention. Lain and Toko's despair mirror one another, each unraveling in response to the other. Their real struggles go ignored, buried beneath the fragile bond they form, clinging to one another in a desperate hunger for human connection. What should be professional sessions working to help Lain with her visions play out more like a chat with a close friend. Both their instabilities that haunt their diaries left at the door, here is no place for them. In Lain's life, the girl Misato becomes an anchor for stability in a rapidly changing environment. She even claims that Misato's presence holds back the visions that stalk her. Yet the anchor is fragile. Misato's presence may stall a major relapse after Kyoko casts Lain out and her home life begins to crumble. But the bond the two have is uncanny. Misato exists only to Lain. No one else has ever seen her. Perhaps a coping mechanism for her social detachment, or a phantom born from the blurred line between wired and reality. Toko at first takes Lain's words as truth. Her stories of going to Misato's house, her mother and father having the girl over for dinner, going to school together. They all seem true, and Lain seems to honestly believe these fantasies, yet they are not reality. There is no family in such a house, no girl at the school, and no friend has ever been to Lain's home. That must be a stress on the parental relationship that slowly tears apart between her mother and father. Lain's reality fragmenting as events overlap. And Toko investigates these inconsistencies. The deeper down the rabbit hole she goes, the clearer it becomes that her own world is no closer to reality than Lain's. They've both been caught in a web of deception. Toko assumed Lain was improving, blind to the fact that her patient is capable of lying, too wrapped up in her own turmoil over boys and self-worth to notice. When she finally confronts the truth, that Lain's life is far more fractured than she had been led to believe, Toko's reality warps alongside Lain's. She feels unqualified, suspecting a major personality split she failed to detect. The sweet, kind Lain can shift in an instant to a cold, cryptic version, the two sides growing increasingly unstable as she withdraws from physical social connection in favor of the interaction that can be found online. When confronted about Misato's possible non-existence, Lain becomes hostile, a flash of rage that hints she suspects the truth, but refuses to accept it herself. Around her, the world continues to fracture further, and this girl was her one touchstone. Her parents' fights escalate into violence and even divorce. Death begins to intrude in her young mind, both in lived reality and online. Images of dead infants arriving in her email. The dark capacity of the internet laid bare. One event bleeds into the next, a domino effect of trauma threatening to destabilize any mind. Her father leaves and her mother becomes Lain's sole caregiver, slipping into alcoholism and abusing her daughter. The deeper Lain sinks into the wired, the more unsettling her mother grows, powerless to intervene, as forces beyond the home guide Lain's path deeper into the fabricated worlds of the wired. That force is the very same place that claims to cure her, the location of her therapy, the place of Toko's employment. The infamous Tachibana Labs operates from behind the scene, as in the anime, silently pulling the strings that shape her past, present, and future. And Lain's destabilization is all part of the larger narrative.
どうして私をレインって呼ぶの？あなた、誰？
Lain is undeniably a real human, yet she was chosen for a greater role by Tachibana, created, selected, placed. Whether by man or god remains unknown. No records exist of her prior to 3 years ago, just before she entered Toko's care. She exists in this space between identities, human and experiment, wired and reality, person and lab rat. Her purpose is to stretch the boundary between collective consciousness and the individual. And yet that very purpose breeds suffering, both for Lain and for everyone around her. Lain is unstable, and that instability ripples outward, projected onto the parental figures and onto Toko. A type of vicarious trauma, the psychological toll on someone repeatedly exposed to another's suffering. In this case, Lain is the very source. Her shifting identity, suspended between human and experiment, creates mounting stress in Toko's already fragile mind as she attempts to wrap her head around this greater plot happening around her and to her. It is possible that Tachibana selected Toko for the role of therapist intentionally, an experiment not just on the girl, but on the humans around her, to test how a being of greater consciousness can affect the psyche of an ordinary human. On top of this building suspicion, Takeshi marries another woman, and a coworker leaks fragments of Toko's personal diary, spiraling her into deeper paranoia, losing trust in everything and everyone around her. She begins to believe that Lain is watching her, both in the physical world and through the wired, an ever-present gaze that she cannot escape. She lashes out, crying and screaming in her journals for Lain to stop tormenting her. The girl becomes an outlet for her collapsing world that she herself allowed to assume control over her life. It's not entirely her fault. She was never qualified to care for Lain, and that is exactly why they picked her. She was doomed to fail before she began. Her instability was merely weaponized against her. Coping with the absence of her father drives Lain into an obsession with creating artificial life. Within the wired, she reconstructs her dad's personality, beginning to assemble a body for his newly created mind. It's a process done in secret, as once when she confided in her mother about bringing him back, she was struck against the face for daring to commit such an atrocity. Now, as she lies cradled in the cold arms of her artificial father, Lain begins to wonder if her mother was right, that some things should never be created, that some things are meant to remain lost. The thought festers into a dark conviction that the physical world itself is not worth belonging to. The rejection, strain, and weight of society eclipse any good that might have touched her life. Here in the lab, she finalizes her decision. The path forward lies in severing human bonds and surrendering herself to the wired's cold embrace. It is no surprise she arrives at this conclusion, given the hurt and trauma she has endured, punishment bestowed on humans for being flesh made conscious. Yet in the wired, her knowledge grants her power to rival a god, the ability to craft a universe within the digital that connects all, the living, the dead, the near, the far. Within the wired, her mother and father don't have to fight. Kyoko doesn't desert her. Misato can truly exist. Toko can stop picking apart her brain. So why not abandon the impossible dream of bringing what she desires into this world and instead transition fully into the realm which offers her static happiness? She begins the transition by destroying her AI father's vessel, dissolving him into pure data, his consciousness absorbed into the wired once more. Soon after, she even liberates her mother from her physical body. What once seemed like a rejection born of despair becomes Lain's personal crusade, freeing those closest to her from the weight of flesh, binding them forever to her wired domain. Lain exists in both worlds, the wired and the reality. This is Tachibana's legacy, the creation of a being both human and digital, stitched together through methods as brilliant as they are grotesque. Yet the flesh recoils from such hybridity. The body aches, rejecting the presence it was never meant to hold, after experiencing the emotional horrors of being human, yearning instead to dissolve fully into the digital realm, and to drag the rest of the world with it. At first, the two instances of Lain stand apart, one confined in reality, the other reigning within the wired. But the Lain of flesh cannot endure the suffering they're dealt. Reality's trauma erodes her, fracturing her mind until she can no longer sustain the weight of existence. Only then do the two selves no longer see one another as a nightmare or vision. They become bound by a single collective truth, that being alive in flesh is nothing but isolating pain. The visions were never hallucinations that could be cured by therapy. They were fragments of the wired Lain, her existence haunting the one who knows the warmth of touch. The fragments encircled the body like vultures, pulling her mind apart, leaving her disoriented, detached, estranged by herself and the fragmented identity that she has come to be. Lain may be an existence that transcends humanity, but she still fears the loss of who she is currently, as the fragments invade her personality and memory. To ground herself in this world and in this body, to feel anything real, she turned to self-harm. To feel any connection, she mistakenly retreated further into the wired and those there that offered conversation. Each attempt to ground herself only widened the void, deepening the fracture between who she was and what she had become. But none of this was ever the fault of the young girl. The despair, the collapse, the illusion of choice, every step had been scripted by Tachibana. She was never living her own life. She was living their experiment. Lain was never meant to thrive. She was designed to fracture, to be fed trauma, dissociation, and rejection until her mind collapsed under the weight of itself. That collapse was the experiment. Toko too was chosen. Her life was sabotaged from the very first day she entered Tachibana. She was never stable, never prepared for the weight she carried. The romantic betrayals, the suicide of her superior, and the crushing monotony of the profession she was picked for because of these faults. Paranoia was only the natural end, and in that state she latched on to Lain. The more she dug into the girl's covered past, the more she lost herself, until obsession became the only tether she had left. No friends, no relationship, no career path. It all could be wrapped into a nice bow of conspiracy, gifted to her by Tachibana Labs. But the tether that kept her searching for answers pulled her too close. The girl she built a connection with, not taking kindly to her prying. She and Lain were both part of a bigger experiment, waiting to see the collapse of the identity that should exist within the wired, and the collapse of a soul that tried to love it. And in the end, Lain chose to bring Toka into the wired, not out of cruelty, but out of recognition. Toko's compassion and interest in Lain left an imprint, and that imprint was carried into the machine. Lain's descent into dissociation and self-harm is a product of the trauma she has faced and the confusion stemming from her unusual birth. This drove her to cling to an idea of transcendence, something the wired offered, with its cold circuits that bend to her will. It is the version of herself that promises a place where human feelings cannot hurt her. Through death, she could reach this idealized realm where everything functions exactly as she desires. An idea we are all too familiar with imagining. Heaven, as described in various philosophies and religions, often present a place where the good exists without the bad. The honest truth is that Lain is being fed a lie. though it is a lie she feeds herself. She believes her wired self when it tells her that this physical identity isn't authentic. She believes this reality is only socially isolating, full of despair, and filled with nightmarish fabrications that dance in her vision. And she believes that the wired is a place where she can merge herself with her father, mother, and Toko, all versions of themselves she created to be perfect. Yet without the parts Lain considers bad in all these people, are they still truly the ones she loved? They are fragments of a whole, representations of the real-world individuals, but will always be fabrications, puppets, lies. In the end, Lain refuses to wrestle with this truth, that happiness only exists because of sadness, that positives have meaning because of negatives, that trust has weight because it can be betrayed. The thought that reality is worth living tormented her for some time, but eventually she gives in to the promise of the facade she can create in the wired, a world of pure, unembellished happiness. So she escapes into this digital world of happiness she had created for herself, uploading her identity and killing off her flesh. She may feel fear in these final moments, as steel bites against her teeth, but the promise of connection with others in the wired is too tempting to turn herself away from. Compared to the story of Lain represented in the anime, this parallel existence is far darker, full of despair and gloom when the credits roll. It serves as a cautionary tale about the effects trauma can have on a child, and how technology can contribute to that trauma. This isn't to say Lain is anti-advancement. It simply reflects human anxiety and fear about what progress can bring, both in terms of new possibilities and new societal challenges. Lain is known for accurately predicting the problems we would face in the emerging digital age. The boundless access to knowledge allowed children to grow more connected and more informed, but also more scarred by the horrors of the world that can be encountered online. It created difficulties in balancing identity and how it is reflected both online and offline. Fractures in one's behavior emerging between the two realms. It revealed the beauty of connecting with people you may never see in person, while also exposing the loneliness and isolation that can result from a lack of physical interaction. These issues are not the fault of the internet, just as it is not Lain's fault she experienced trauma. They are simply products of their existence, an unavoidable reality we would do better to face and accept, rather than reject or fear. Lain did well to capture the anxieties of the 90s and even the early 2000s. Its entire movement was like a time capsule, showing what was possible at a time before physical media was gradually replaced by digital on-demand access, and before mass marketing campaigns consumed budgets and attention, overshadowing projects that spread through forums and the word of mouth. It was as if Lain herself was slowly entering our world, only to be drowned out by time, disappearing from our collective memory, just as she did in the anime. She lives on in pockets of the internet, and videos like this that continue to tell her story decades later, spreading the multimedia project through a new form of content. Lain's PlayStation story has become a website to be visited, and discs still floats around the internet, waiting to be bought and played, just as they were intended to be enjoyed on a CRTV screen in someone's living room. It's a strange world we live in. When I grew up, DVDs were still the primary media. Flip phones were giving way to iPhones, and YouTube was in the process of becoming the largest internet platform. Everything changes constantly. The world spins and humans advance. It's odd to think that the ingredients for any invention that will ever be made exists now in reality. The next internet is just along the horizon, waiting to be assembled by the right individual. And so I have to wonder, is the reality Lain hoped to create even possible? At this time, humanity is the most connected it's ever been, and that's a statement we say every decade. So there may come a time where we can all be connected through the internet, like Lain imagines in The Wired, but it also may be best if we die alongside our bodies, allowing our consciousness to naturally return to the collective, whatever that may be. Man may fear the machine and that which it is capable of, but one must not forget who creates the machine. We are responsible for our own fears, We can either let them rule us with anxiety or learn to exist alongside the changes. Lain's game serves as a warning of what happens when one becomes consumed by the digital, losing sight of the human within us. She may not have had a normal birth, but she still bled like us. She still felt like us. It's unfortunate that she did not have the support system in place to wake her from her psychological breakdown and once more realize the good that exists alongside the bad in this reality. Miss Lain may have forgotten what it meant to be human, but we do not have to. Serial Experiments was a multimedia project, and its game doesn't exist to be played, but to be experienced firsthand, in its raw and unpredictable state. It's a puzzle that has no final answer, but poses profound questions about humanity, advancements, and our existence. It's not a game to be explained with clarity, rather a game that invites reflection. In exploring the mind of a girl who is troubled and fragmented, we are forced to confront our own relationship with the self, with technology, and with the reality we build for our egos to exist in. Lain still exists out there, across the landscape of the internet, waiting to be found and created in new ways. Her story is still being written, as new theories and realities of her worlds are imagined, and as we write and decide what this digital landscape means for ourselves. It may sound like the ramblings of someone with too much time on their hands, but simply that Lain exists, or that an entity like Lain exists, is because we continue to create meaning in her name and give reason for her identity to remain present.